just really quick, I think this is Ben's first mistake of the evening, not going the anti-theist route.
Yeah, acknowledging that they're good Christians is quite a concession off the bat.
I like it.
Yeah, why even do that?
In the future, the second A in GTAA will stand for anti-theist.
Yes, give them an anti-theist. That's what this podcast, aside from IQ and success, anti-theism is what this podcast is all about.
There's a niche
that
we're working for.
Yeah.
In all seriousness, though, Ryan, I do want to. I've got this. I don't think you're an anti-theist, right?
I'm getting there. After what you just said, I'm now. I think I should be. Yeah.
I think I went through a kind of a new atheist phase, like a lot of people did. Kind of embarrassed by it now.
Yeah.
And I've dropped that, if not the atheism, but I still do. I don't think that fighting theism is the most important political fight of our lives. But I do have like a kind of background discomfort with religion.
Yeah, okay. That's fair. I mean, yeah, if we're being serious, I definitely went through my anti-theist phase, for sure. I'm now pretty indifferent to that. I mean, philosophically, I'm very interested in it. I enjoy these kinds of debates. But if I meet someone and they're religious and they're not trying to push it on me, I kind of don't care. Like, just that there's so many other issues that are just way more pressing. I mean, overall, do I think the world would be better if we could do away with organized religion? Yeah, probably. But that's like number 50 on the list of things we could do to improve the world.
I don't think Ben would agree with that.
Yeah.
I think he's completely agnostic about it because low IQ.
Right.
But I think that there's kind of a master argument against religion. Here it is. Ready?
Okay. I'm ready.
In general, it's better to have true beliefs than false beliefs. Religions advocate false beliefs. Now that you have to concede, but I don't see how you can't concede. Even if you're religious, whatever religious faith you have is incompatible with a bunch of other religious faiths. Even if you're ecumenical, your ecumenicism is incompatible with other religious faiths. So they have to be mostly false.
Right. Most religious beliefs have to be false. That's right.
False beliefs are bad, or even worse when they're held with indefatigable fervor. And religious beliefs are held that way generally.
Usually, yeah. I think that's
Ergo.
Right. No, I mean, I tend to find that argument pretty convincing. So yeah, I think we do better without systems that promote lots of false beliefs. But yeah, I don't think this is, again, I'm past my phase where like my Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins phase where this is the big issue that we have to deal with. It's pretty low on the list.
Absolutely. If I met Cornel West, I wouldn't even dream.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this argument, there are way more important things to talk about. But this is why the new give them an argument format, GTAA : IQ and success, is an explicitly anti-theistic YouTube channel and podcast.
Yes.
I think there's a political argument for keeping the like atheism on the back burner as an issue, because I think that there are also tons of people to build coalitions with that are religious people that probably believe in a lot of positive rights, but the second you start bashing their religion as something you'd want to abolish, you lose them.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think
Yeah.
any political program that involves abolishing religion is a starter.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Even just like a rhetorical stand against it, not like a, the system that I envision would abolish religion. I think that if you're trying to promote like a left political project, we already have, so few people that genuinely understand, understand class and their class position, that I think adding that component into it without at least being an analysis of, the church as a hierarchical institution, like 100% is I think a valid thing to go after. But religion as a concept, I'd say loses people. That's my
I think that's very plausibly, a very reasonable explanation of why Ben spends a little time clearing his throat here and making sure he knows that people know he's not on that side of the issue.
Yeah.
But it is where we are now. So
I was
forward.
incredibly anti-theistic after being raised as both, like, first a Catholic and then an Episcopal, which is kind of like weaning off being a Catholic.
Right.
So so it's something that an idea. I mean, like a strategy I've come to after knowing religious people that, it kind of pulled me, like knowing spiritual but not religious people, that kind of pulled me out of that that mindset, I guess.
Yeah, the Michael Brooks of the world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like a lot of people in my family have similar spiritual politics, I'd say, to Michael too. I mean, it's not just like the Catholic part of it. I don't know. So yeah, that's my one interjection.
Yeah, I hope you're going to feel comfortable staying on board with the program, even though we're going to be explicitly and obnoxiously anti-theistic from now on.
Only if we can do the hard pivot to like neocon politics, like the Sam Harris style, like thought experiments about bombing the Middle East. I'll stick around for those.
Forrest, it's important that we don't advertise that we're doing that, though.
Oh fuck, we're on, aren't we? I forgot this one.
This is live. This is live.
All right, back to the waiting room with me.
All right. All right, shall we resume?
Oh yeah, of course.
Wife Jennifer Burgis. So that's not the point, right? I think that like people like Robert E. Lee, who fought for what I regard as the most evil cause in human history, was a Christian, but so is John Brown. So it's clearly possible to be on the right side of history and disagree with me about metaphysics. All I need from anyone politically is that they don't have any interest in trying to impose their religious beliefs on others. All right, that extended bit of throat clearing out of the way, let's get to the main event. I became interested in doing this debate because I have read and watched Pastor Douglas say that without theism, it's impossible to have what he will call authoritative morality, as opposed to just statements of preference. Sometimes this seems to be a claim about moral motivation, that without a divine enforcer to reward or punish people, they don't have a reason to act morally. To the extent that this is the claim, I think that's wrong in multiple very deep ways, and I'm sure we'll get to that later on. But in the limited time I have for this opening statement, I want to focus on what I think is the main claim being made. So Pastor Douglas is a presuppositionalist, meaning he thinks it's impossible for theists and atheists to debate on neutral ground. You have to assume something about the existence or non-existence of God to get started. On the face of it, you'd think that this would make debates like this one impossible. The reason it doesn't is that, as any good philosopher or logician should be able to tell you, one of the best ways to argue against any position is to assume its presuppositions for the sake of argument and derive unsavory conclusions from them that don't follow from your view. I take it, is what Pastor Douglas is doing when he criticizes atheists as being unable to make sense of the idea of authoritative morality, by which he usually seems to mean, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, objective morality. And while I do think it's entirely possible to have an argument between theists and atheists on neutral ground, certainly on many subjects, that way of framing it is one that I'm perfectly happy to use as far as we conduct tonight's debate. And I want to make two very simple points here. These are going to be my two big claims. The first is that on the presupposition that there is no God, There are plenty of philosophical options for making sense of the idea that morality is not relative to time, place, or culture, or relative to individual preferences, but that right things would be right even if no one ever knew that they were right, and wrong things would be wrong even if no one ever knew that they would be wrong. So, for example, you could be an atheist utilitarian and believe that whatever maximizes well-being and minimizes suffering is objectively right, no matter who does or doesn't think it's right. You could be an atheist Kantian and believe that treating other people as mere means to your ends is objectively morally wrong, no matter who does or doesn't think it's morally wrong. You could be an atheist Rawlsian and believe that whatever society perfectly rational people would decide if they had to do, they had to live in it, but they didn't know whether they were going to be born black or white, male or female, rich or poor, is objectively a just society, even if no one considers it just. So that's the first point. Now, maybe you don't find any of these options plausible. Maybe you think, as many philosophers, including some atheist ones, have, that there's a deep philosophical problem with making sense of the idea of objective morality, of what would that even mean for morality to be objective? Well, if you think so, that brings us to the second point, which is this one. If it's a big philosophical problem, how to make sense of objective morality, accepting for the sake of argument the presupposition of theism does literally nothing to solve that problem. It doesn't help in any way. The view that it would help, at least in its purest form, is called divine command ethics. The divine command ethicist says that morality isn't about what the utilitarian thinks it's about, maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering. It's not about not treating people as mere means like the Kantian thinks. It's not about what the Rawlsian thinks it's about. It's about doing whatever God commands. And there's a very simple and totally unsolvable problem with this moral framework, one that has been well known philosophically for thousands of years, and one which has convinced even many thoughtful Christian philosophers who know about it that divine command ethics must be the wrong way to think about morality. Now, I could see somebody watching this and say, how can you be a Christian and not be a divine command ethicist? We'll get to that. But let's talk about the argument itself. It's called the Euthyphro objection. Euthyphro, I never trust my Greek pronunciation, which...
Hello? We all miss being in the office. Coworkers and coffee breaks.
I don't remember
to divine command ethics, and it comes from a dialogue written by Plato a little over 23 centuries ago. In the dialogue, Socrates is arguing with a character named Euthyphro about whether holiness can be defined as that which the gods love. Socrates asks him whether the gods love what they love because it is holy, or whether the holy is holy because gods love it, because the gods love it. Translated Socrates' challenge into the terms of tonight's debate, the question is whether what God commands us to do is morally good because God commands it, or whether God commands it because it's good. So start with the second option. If you say that God commands it because it's morally good, then you've just stepped out of divine command ethics. You've just accepted that it's good for some reason other than that God commands it. If, on the other hand, it's morally good because God commands it, then you have this problem. If God hypothetically had commanded you, thou shalt kill whosoever shall annoy you, and rape whosoever you shall lust after, and thou shalt not under any circumstances be kind or charitable or help little old ladies cross the street, then you would have to say that murder and rape would be good, and charity and kindness and helping little old ladies cross the street would be morally bad. That's absurd. And note that it's absurd in exactly the same way that moral relativism is absurd. It's absurd in exactly the same way that it would be absurd to say that if the Nazis had won World War II and killed everyone who disagreed with their actions, or brainwashed everybody who was left to think that exterminating Jews was morally right, then it would follow that from that the exterminating Jews would be morally right. If you think that's absurd, in exactly the same way, you should think that thinking that murder and rape were morally right if they'd been commanded by God would be morally good. In fact, the more we think about this objection, the more that we can see that divine command ethics is a form of relativism. It says that morality is relative to God's arbitrary preferences. And a quick word to any Christian viewers who may be encountering this argument for the first time: if what you're thinking right now is, oh, but God wouldn't command these terrible things, because those things are bad and God is good, you've just rejected divine command ethics. If God wouldn't command them because they're morally bad, then their moral badness must be logically independent of God's commands. This is why philosophically sophisticated Christians understand that to make sense of the idea that God's commands are objectively good, they have to give up divine command ethics and say that God commands good things because they're good, not the other way around. They could still say that reading the Bible or praying for guidance is a good way to find out what's good and bad, because God, on their view, is all-knowing, and so, of course, he would know all the moral facts as well as all the other kinds of facts. But whatever you think of that claim, it's a completely different claim than saying that God's will is what makes morally good things morally good and morally bad things morally bad, which I think is what Pastor Douglas is going to need to say in order to make sense of the idea that it's impossible to make sense of objective morality on the presupposition of atheism. Now, some people who want to hold on to divine command ethics think that it somehow helps to start talking about how God's commands aren't arbitrary because they flow from God's nature. Trust me, that won't help. The reason it won't help is because it leads to the exact same problem again. It just pushes it one link up the chain. So the question now, if God's nature is kind and merciful and steadfast, is, okay, what if God's nature had been cruel and capricious and unforgiving? Would that therefore be a morally good nature? In other words, is what makes kindness and steadfastness and forgiveness good the fact that that happens to be God's nature, or is that God's nature because God is a morally good being? It's exactly the same problem. Now, I think we could follow this thread of argument up a lot more. I'm sure that we will. We get to the open dialogue portion of the evening. I also really hope when we get to the open dialogue, we talk about this business about moral motivation, because again, sometimes it seems to me that that is what Pastor Douglas seems to be going to be talking about when he uses this phrase, authoritative morality. But if we don't get to those two subjects, somebody please ask about them in the Q&A, because I really want to talk about both. But right now, I've probably been going on long enough for the opening statement. So, Pastor Douglas, the floor.
That was a very very high IQ introduction. I liked, especially, I really enjoyed his presentation of the Euthyphro dilemma, especially his. I think it's right, but also rhetorically very good to emphasize that, because Doug Wilson's going to come at atheism and say atheism is all relativism. So it's very good to hit on the point right away that if you take the horn of the dilemma that Wilson's going to take, that's also a form of relativism.
Yeah. So over the past few weeks, Ryan, Ben, and I have sat and watched William Lane Craig debate Christopher Hitchens and then Shelley Kagan. And both times I brought up this concern that neither Hitchens nor Kagan started the debate by trying to put Craig, a theist, on his back foot with this Euthyphro dilemma.
Yep.
And then I went on to explain the dilemma. So really high IQ here of Ben to pretty much copy me.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of our the techniques we'll be teaching over the course of this podcast. One of the ways to raise your IQ is to emulate high IQ people. And Ben's doing a fantastic job of that here. Anybody
who's a professor will tell you plagiarism is a great way to get to success. Yeah. And anything that gets you to success is high IQ.
Yeah, by definition. That's what high IQ means.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Good job, Ben.
Yeah. Floor is yours.
Thanks so much. We'll kick it over. Floor is all yours, Doug.
All right. Thanks very much. I want to begin with my gratitude. I want to thank the host of this debate, the good folks of Modern Day Debate, in a time when many are clamoring for actual intellectual interaction about things that actually matter. to have them banned and chased off the premises. We need to have more exchanges like this, not fewer. So I'm very, very grateful. I'm also grateful to Ben Burgis for agreeing to have this discussion. I noticed that he naturally received some pressure online encouraging him to pull his skirts away from me with a sneer, which he resisted, and straight up the middle, I'm very grateful for that. I really do appreciate it. Living in cancel culture the way we do, we just have to resist every form of shouting people down. We need to hear people out. So, to the question, is atheism immoral? As the Christian in this debate, I naturally have the affirmative. And so I want to hasten to clarify what form of this I would want to defend and what form of it I would not defend. All right. So that question, is atheism immoral, can be construed in different ways. And I am more than eager to defend one form of it and not at all eager to defend forms of it that I would regard as silly or inconsequential. Of course, so a few qualifiers on what I do not mean. Given, of course, as a Christian, given that God exists, to deny that he does would be a sin, and hence an immoral position, right? So if it's true that God exists and we owe everything to him and he loves us and we're saying, I don't think you're there, of course, that's a sin. And hence immoral. But I'm not taking our question in that sense, because that's at one level that would be like asking, is atheism atheistic? Right? It'd be tautological. It'd be a debate about nothing. So I don't take the question in that way. Rather, I believe the question has to do with whether atheism is a greenhouse that grows levels of accepted immorality that surpass the levels that the human race has always been able to produce. So wherever the human race goes, you're going to find all kinds of gaudy misbehavior. And you're going to find a sort of baseline of human sinfulness, human wickedness, human iniquity. And you're going to find it among Buddhists and among Hindus and among Muslims and among Christians. Every culture under the sun, including the Christian ones, has had to grapple with and deal with the fact of human frailty, human sinfulness, human problems. So I'm taking this as, is atheism something that takes it to the next level? I can't argue that atheism is immoral because atheists have been known to sin, because everybody does. Right? That wouldn't prove anything. So, is atheism a greenhouse that grows these things to a level that is out of the ordinary? If sins were pumpkins, does atheism produce prize winners for the state fair? Does atheism produce really big pumpkins? And I believe actually the answer to that question is yes. But I think you have to zoom out and look at the big picture. And that leads to the next qualifier. I'm not maintaining, for example, that if I lived next door to Ben and my wife and I were going on vacation, that his atheism would somehow require him, as soon as we disappeared around the corner, to run over and burn down my house. I don't believe that is what we're discussing. I don't believe that. No, I'm sure we'd get along fine, and that he would be happy to take in our mail and so on. And I can also, in my thought experiment, come up with certain Christians that I wouldn't want to ask to take in my mail, that I wouldn't get along with as well. So, in certain respects, if we're talking about public morality or how you behave in your interactions with other people, we also have to reckon with the bell curve, which is the fact, if I say something like men are taller than women, I'm dealing with two bell curves, and I can easily produce certain women who are taller than certain men, and thus my generalization is falsified, but it's not really falsified because it was a generalization. So I believe that atheistic cultures, atheistic societies do get to hellish levels of immorality, but I don't believe that that's the case for individual atheists necessarily at all. So I'm not maintaining that. So in what sense would I want to argue that atheism is immoral? There are three things that I would like to mention, and to anticipate Ben's reference to motivation is my third one. So there's two things that I want to tag first as more important, but motivation is my third point, and it, I think, is an important one, but just not the most important one. The first thing I want to mention is that we have a need for God in order to have a fixed definition of morality, a fixed definition of morality. If there is no God, and Darwin is right, then morality must evolve right along with us. There were things that we used to be able to do back when we were eels. There are things we used to be able to do when we were crustaceans. There were things that we could do that we can't do now because the species evolves and the morality, the accepted canons of behavior evolve right along with us. What we currently call moral, and I put that in scare quotes, what we currently call moral is no more fixed than the fins that we used to have or the antenna that we will have someday. The fins that we used to have are all gone now, and our morality that we had back then is gone also, and the morality that we currently have is going to be gone when we get to the antenna stage. So the need for a shared definition of morality is crucial in a debate like this, because what will happen at some point if I point to abortion or to same-sex marriage or to statist thieveries, and I say, well, of course, atheism produces pro-abortion legislation and produces openness to any kind of marriage you want to have, and it produces, I'm sure I could develop my list or extend my list of immoral offenses, and if I get it long enough, then Ben's going to interrupt and say something like, those things aren't immoral. What are you talking about? Well, clearly, what I'm talking about at that point is we have different definitions of morality. So our understanding of morality might overlap somewhat, but you have to start with definitions. And I think definitions come back to, on things like morality, come back to the two great playground questions of why and who says, right? Why and who says. So next, the second thing that I want to get to is the need for a rationale. So the first is the definition. How do we define what is moral and immoral? The second is the need for a rationale for morality. And in this case, for any kind of morality at all, whether it's Ben's or mine's or somebody else. By this, I mean any system that says to an individual, you ought to do thus and such. If there's a thou shalt not, if you're out of line for doing this, you ought to have done otherwise. If a system comes from outside the individual and says you ought to do this, then somebody's going to say, why? Who says? Why and who says? Where does that ought come from? Where does that ought come from? Where do we get obligation? What produces obligation? Moral, and specifically moral obligation. What is its basis? So let us postulate that Ben and I have a friend in common. Okay, we have a friend in common, and he is a man who's a dedicated atheist. He's on his deathbed, and Ben and I arrive at the same time to say our farewells to him. This friend takes the opportunity to tell the two of us that he lived as he pleased, and that, speaking quite frankly now, since he's going to die later that day, he has gotten away with a bunch of stuff. Let's say that he then mentions a line of atrocities that he's committed, and that Ben and I are both appalled by the things he's done. All right, so Ben and I don't have any difference at all about our disapproval of what this guy's behavior has been. We both disapprove of it. The issue of the rationale comes in when our friend passes away, and Ben and I are standing out on his front lawn, about to go our respective ways, and we get to talking about why we disapprove. Okay, why do we disapprove? Why was this guy wrong? All right, so the issue is not whether it's possible, and this is something that Ben alluded to in his opening statement. The issue is not whether it's possible for this friend to have been a Kantian or to have been a utilitarian. That's true. He could have been those things, just as Ben can be those things. But as it turned out, as it happened, what he actually was a nihilist. What he actually was someone who said, I'm going to do absolutely whatever I want to. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. I'm going to do as I please. My question is not whether Ben makes room for the Kantian and utilitarian and other forms of atheism that hold to an objective morality. My question is whether he has room for the nihilist who lives that way. Is that consistent also? Okay. Now, then that leads to the third thing. The third thing has to do with the motivation. So the first is, how do we define morality? And I think we can realize that on a number of fundamental issues, the Christian and the atheist would define it very, very differently. The second thing is how, if we have an area of shared agreement on these things our deceased friend did that we both disapprove of, what is our rationale for disapproving of it? And can we say that this selfish man who just passed away was in any way wrong? Who did he sin against? What did he violate? He did get away with it. He got clean away with it. But then third is motivation for living morally. And this is reflected a little bit in my scenario of the man on the deathbed. The human race is a piece of work. We do all kinds of awful things to one another. And because we do awful things to one another, we need encouragement. We need help. We need to realize that we are not the fine beings that we like to flatter ourselves that we are. And one of the things that is a motivating factor is the reality of justice. Not justice as an abstraction, but justice as in judgment coming. So when a person lives his life in the fear of God, not fear in the sense of scared, but fear in the sense of an awesome respect for who God is, and the realization that we are all going to appear before the judgment seat of God, and we're going to answer for how we lived. We're going to. This is a graded course. Now, oftentimes, anybody who wants to tell you that students behave in exactly the same way in pass-fail courses that they do in graded courses hasn't been teaching very long. People behave differently. And if you convince the population, if you convince the entire population that there is no accountability, there are no final grades, there is no day of judgment, there are many people who have lived lives of unbridled selfishness and who got clean away with it. If you convince them that that's the way it is, there will be a number of people who will aspire to that. And when they aspire to that, the atheist is not in a position to say, you're making a wrong choice. Says who? Why is that a wrong choice? All right, I'm good there.
Thank you very much. We'll jump into the open conversation. Want to let you.
Whew.
Man.
So
I just felt my IQ dip. I'm down to like 95 now.
I didn't watch this debate before tonight because preparing for things is low IQ.
Very low IQ. You just count on your brain to handle it in the moment. Right. And that was a huge mistake. My brain could not handle all of what it just took in.
So I thought this was going to be like a philosophical engagement. And it kind of looks like it might be in a bit, but he set the stage like he wants to make the argument that as an empirical matter of fact,
Yes.
being an atheist statistically makes you more likely to be immoral.
Now, I'll give him credit. This is kind of a high IQ move to make a really strong empirical claim and offer zero evidence for it. That's very alpha, very high IQ. I like it.
Yeah, measurement. This man's brain band. That's quite a move.
Yeah, so so his whole argument hinges on this empirical thing, and with with no evidence.
Well, he starts with this empirical claim, and then moves on to something that looked more like good old-fashioned philosophy, right? I have to say that after several hours of listening to William Lane Craig make relatively sophisticated and clear arguments, and being kind of frustrated to see him bend his obviously high IQ to silly ends, this was a breath of fresh air. These were not very clear or cogent arguments.
We had a lot of plant metaphors, greenhouses, pumpkins, very, very vivid. Okay. Forrest,
can I just say that this last episode that we did, the Jordan Peterson episode, to get ready for that, I had to watch like 6-7 hours of Jordan Peterson lectures where he's doing the similar thing where he he makes all these weird like examples and like illusions, and I think I really did lose IQ points during that weekend. But I don't know. I think that it's kind of, I mean, I'm glad he didn't go for the full atheism is immoral because there's a God, like that logic, like that circular logic thing, because I feel like one problem with trying to debate like super religious people is that their ultimate card is like, well, no matter what you say to me rhetorically or logically, like in the end I'm right because there's a God and I believe there's a God. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard. Like, I feel like to have any kind of successful debate with somebody who has that level of religiosity, I guess, is
it's frustrating. I mean, at least with someone like Craig, who is just as religious, but he will at least try to respond to the arguments. Like Wilson here, like, I mean, Ben explained, like he set him up, like we said, he did exactly what we wished that Shelley Kagan and Hitchens would have done. He set him up initially saying, look, appealing to God isn't going to answer these hard questions in any way whatsoever. And Wilson just didn't even respond to that at all. He just didn't even acknowledge that Ben had already undercut him in that way.
It's kind of similar to how I feel about like abortion debates. Like, if you debate somebody who believes very strongly in believes very strongly that abortion is a sin, like the response is, yeah, well, you're a baby killer. You know what I mean? Like, that's like the ultimate conclusion of it. And in this sense, it's like, yeah, well, you're a moral atheist. So I don't know. It's a very
question begging kind of thing. But it's very, it is frustrating.
I do want to at least draw some parallels between what Wilson is doing now and what we saw Craig doing in a more sophisticated voice, which is both of them. And I think this is a very common move for this kind of theological account of morality, is points to what they think of as a motivational vacuum for the atheist.
Yeah.
If you're an atheist and you see this person on his deathbed saying that he was a shit his whole life, you have no resources to tell him why he shouldn't have behaved that way.
Yeah.
Whereas the theist does, because the theist can say, God's going to punish you.
God's going to get you
for it now.
God's going to get you. Yeah.